Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from biology to equipment and chemistry. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. My guest for this episode is Farmer Ty. And Farmer Ty is one half of Black Label Aquatics, based out of Austin, Texas. And Ty has a degree in ocean and coastal resources, which I'm sure has applied to some of the work that he does with corals today. And we had a really hilarious conversation. I'm really excited for this episode to come out. We talked a lot about the past, present, and future of reef keeping. And as hobbyists that both started in the early 2000s, we've definitely seen a lot of changes, for better mostly, and some for worse. I will link to his website and any resources that we discuss in this episode. If you want to support this podcast, the best thing you can do is like, subscribe, share, write us a review, and if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions for a future episode, please reach out. And without further ado, here is my convo with Farmer Ty. All right, well, I got the farmer himself. Farmer Ty, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for getting the kids bathed up and put to bed and time for a chat.
That is my life these days. I got 3 kids under 6, so that is my life these days.
Yeah, I got no kids, so that's probably why I have time to do stuff like this on the side. So I was thinking there's a subject that I kind of want to do on a regular basis with people. It's called past, present, and future of reefing. And I was thinking we can kind of talk a little bit about the old days, because you've been in the hobby for, 30 years, I think I read?
30 years? Oh my gosh.
How long?
16.
Okay,
16,
I don't know
17.
where I read that.
About 2004-ish.
Yeah, I feel like you would have been really young if you started 30 years ago. So.
I was like, man, I'm only 42. So like, whoa.
Yeah, you're like the same age as me. I'm 41. Yeah, I started in about 2001. So, you
so about the same time.
Pretty similar vibe. Yeah. But I mean, what would you say, looking back on the corals and the equipment and the stuff back in those early days, like what is like, what do you think of the hobby back then, and sort of moving on to the present, like what has changed since then?
I mean, there's a simplicity to it. And I know that, with what we have these days, like technology, constant monitoring, it's nice to have. It definitely is. And for as my life has gotten busy and ramped up, wife, kids, all that stuff, like, it's nice to be able to get pinged by my phone saying, hey, your alk level is dropping. Whereas something that, back when we were starting, there was no monitoring. There was no any of that. So if anything, you tested that morning, you're like, oh, what the heck happened to my alk?
Yeah.
And then. So, there was a simplicity to it. But at the same time, I think that simplicity was beneficial in certain ways. And there were cons to it as well. But I think overall, we just thought less. I'm summarizing for you too, but assuming for you too, but I just thought about it a little less. I'm like, hey, the system is running, things are happy. I go there and I feed my fish, feed the corals. I'm like, hey, things look good. And I go away and I can let it go. It's the funniest things, but I can just let it go. And nowadays I'm like constantly being reminded. I'm like, oh, my alks are getting a little lower, magnesium's starting to drop, and it's like constantly on my mind. So different.
Yeah, but I definitely think, simplicity is bliss when it comes to the reef hobby.
It is.
I mean, we can get a little bit OCD, checking our apex or our trident before we go to bed. But at the same time, I mean, it's definitely worth it when you can see like something trending down, especially in a system that's highly stocked. It's like, I'm sure in your systems, your alkalinity could plummet pretty fast. If I don't know if you're using calcium reactor or 2-part or what your main.
Yeah, we're using calcium reactors on our systems, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We can drop 2.7 DKH in a day.
Yeah.
So
if a line is blocked,
Exactly. So
Yeah.
getting that notification is a big deal, you know. So,
Yeah. Testing every 6 hours is
but
enough
yeah,
to avoid a disaster at times, for sure.
right,
For
right.
sure.
But
Yeah.
again, pros and cons, because then the other side of it, you're like, oh, you're like constantly on, so it's kind of
Yeah.
a little more exhausting, I would say, mentally. But like the corals are, I think, better off for it. I just think like one of the drawbacks to having so much information and having so much data readily available to you, sometimes you get caught in that. I'm not sure that happened to you as well, but initially when I started incorporating all this technology, I got sucked into that whole overcorrection,
Chasing the numbers a bit too, right?
going too fast even. Like you see
Yeah.
something happening, you correct it immediately, but maybe you should have spaced it out over a couple of days, but you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this or this thing. And so I've noticed there's a detriment to having so much data for my personality and mine
Yeah.
alone because I'm so OCD about it. I'm like, oh, I need to correct it now. And then boom, and then the corals do that little recovery
Yeah.
uh, and it's just that back and forth of trying to recover from whatever mistake happened here, and the recovery is hitting it too. So it's an interesting change now that we're dealing with what we have with the future technologies that we have. So
Yeah, totally. Like speaking of like say like an alkalinity swing, what's a swing
yeah,
that you have noticed like detrimental repercussions like as far as
you
like
know,
alkalinity numbers?
I guess for me personally, and we've always run a little more acroporo dominant, but
Yeah.
Uh, color change is going to be the first thing I see. So
Yeah.
loss of color. So anytime I get anything beyond like maybe a 1.5 DKH drop in like a day,
Yeah.
definitely lose color. And it may just be in some pieces, it just loses that little bit of glimmer. And you can't
Yeah.
really tell right off the bat. It still has all the same colors, but it just doesn't pop as
Some of the
much to you. And you're
vibrance.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's that
yeah, yeah,
vibrance.
just and to the casual observer, they wouldn't notice a thing. But when you're staring at it every day and you're like, man, I think it lost its pop, and so that's
Yeah.
what I noticed with 1.5 DKH. If it drops any lower than that in a day, I mean two, that's where I see like there's certain species of Acropora that are at least very sensitive to those type of drops. So
Yeah.
those are like my canaries, and when I start seeing that, a lot of the smooth skins, a lot of the smaller skeletons, like the dragon varieties. Like anytime
Yeah.
there's a drop like that, boom, then you start
Yeah.
seeing STN or some maybe even RTN right away. So
Would you agree that I think when you have your nutrients a little bit more elevated and the polyps are a little bit fatter and a little bit healthier looking, like corals tend to be a little bit more resilient to those
I,
swings?
I would 100% agree with that, and that's just some of the things over the years that you kind of experiment with. The higher nutrient levels definitely, like you said, kind of the thicker flesh, fluffier
Yeah.
pops.
Yeah.
But what I notice also is like I lose a little bit more color with those higher nutrients in certain species only. Like an
Mhm.
Oregon sport could care less. Like an Oregon
Yeah.
full of great blue at 5 ppm,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at like 50. It looks great either or. But I do feel like if I move up my nutrients too much, like some of my other like my tenuouses don't kind of pop with those rainbow colors once the nutrient levels get too high. And I know I'm
Yeah.
just speaking of my experience because some people have, zero point 0.4 phosphates and like 50 nitrates, and their polyps are beautiful.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
very
system is different. I
system
get
dependent. There's so many factors, and I find with tenuous, I've been talking to a couple people about like a little bit lower par for them sometimes brings out the best coloration, like that
it.
250. Not necessarily that 400 to 500 range that you might
Right.
put a milli under or something like that, right?
Right. And so, what, it's funny you mentioned that because what threw me off initially was, once the tenuous craze was at its peak and we were seeing like, home wreckers and Walt Disney's and all that stuff, like right when it was starting to go, home wreckers, at least for me, I couldn't pull that pink out unless that thing was slammed with 400 plus par. Like there's
Mm.
no pink unless I slam it with four. And so like from that point on, I did that to all the tenuous. And then I realized, wait a minute, some of
Yeah,
these you put in
yeah,
200 and they look better. So it's just kind of
yeah,
that experiment, learn as you go kind of thing. But Initially I was slamming all my tenuous because I'm gonna get those pinks like those home wreckers.
Yeah, they're all
And then
gonna
I
get
started
better.
realizing,
Yeah.
yeah, you're losing the color. You put it in 250 and it glows. So it's so
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of tenuous and those fancy sort of rainbow varieties, like I think that's another thing going back to the sort of past of, the corals that were available when we kind of got into the hobby. Like we
Yeah.
didn't see anything like that. Like the tenuous
No.
that were on the market were, maybe like a cream color with a blue tip,
Right. These
maybe
were the
green
most
with a
boring.
blue tip. Um,
Yeah.
and I think some of the, we were talking about how, the old school style was a little more hands off, less devices, less checking stuff all the time. I don't know if I went back to like past me, say 15 years ago, if I would be able to get the colors out of some of these
Yeah.
tenuous that I do now.
It's true. No, I
So,
agree. I agree.
yeah.
I'm not even sure if I look back 10 to 20 years if I'd be happy with the tank that was in front of me at the time.
Yeah.
Like just comparing standards of different days. I was like, man, back in 2005, my tank was gross if I looked at it from my modern perspective, if you want to call it
Yeah.
modern perspective. So I don't really know, but yeah, fully agreed. Like some of those tenuouses they're just plain boring. Like I'd
Yeah.
take a green slimer over a tenuous any day back when we were running,
Yeah.
VHO, tube lights and metal
Yeah.
halides. It's like, yeah.
Well, another
So,
factor too, I mean, is the blue LED spectrum is making a lot of
right.
those colors pop. And I bet you, talking about your old tank, and you're like, yeah, it probably didn't look that great. If you took that exact tank and went,
Yeah.
got somebody back in the future, went back in time and was like, let's put these Orfec bars and this,
You're right.
radians on this thing, and you'd just be
And
like,
you'd be like,
oh,
oh,
what the
the
hell?
colors.
Yeah, it's
So
an
yeah,
interesting thing when it comes to. I mean, imagine for the companies when they're picking broodstock for mariculture SPS. I know some of them look with blue flashlight to really see what they're looking at,
right,
because you wouldn't really.
right,
Most coral looks. I mean, I've seen them in the wild. Like they're green, brown. Maybe you'll
right.
see a little bit of a pink tip or a blue tip, but it's really hard to
Right.
tell when you're out there.
And
Yeah.
that's the conversations I
Um,
have with my non-reefer friends is they're like, whoa, look at all these colors. And I'm like, yeah, but like that's not natural. Like,
yeah.
and I'm not saying it's not natural in that sense, but I'm like, you're not gonna see it like this
Yeah.
in the natural environment. It's just kind of how we manipulated the lights and how to show off their best colors is basically what I tell
Yeah,
them.
yeah, no, for sure. And one thing that about having non-hobbyists over is you get this like really very pure reflection of what actually looks cool, because we,
Right,
we kind of get obsessed with stuff that's kind of, I don't know, a little more like I don't know, the advanced hobbyist kind of stuff. And I think
right.
I don't know, the layman is gonna like see something that you kind of forgot was cool and be like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is really cool. I mean, obviously they'll look at and feel it. Anything with motion seems to get more attention, but
Right, right.
yeah,
What always sticks out in my head is star polyps. Back in the day when everyone had some star polyps, I'm like, no matter what, as intricate as what, oh, this species of Acropora is so hard to grow and get to this size and get this color, and then they look over and see this like $5 star polyp in my tank.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
man, that's really cool. And I'm like, no,
it
no,
is
no, don't
cool.
look over there, look over here. So I totally get it. Like just from a step away from the nuances of our hobby and getting so deep into it that an average viewer looks at it and like picks out certain different things to us. So
Yeah,
it's refreshing,
yeah,
disheartening sometimes when you're like, oh, but you passed over like $3,000 colony of whatever over
yeah,
here for this simple little Dunkins or whatever on
yeah,
the side.
totally. So
So,
I guess in terms of the present part of the hobby, what do you think
uh-huh.
about the
Yeah,
corals coming in right now as far as like, and we've got crazy stuff coming in from Malaysia, which
yeah,
some of the nicer looking corals I've seen, not all of them are necessarily easy to keep or easy to access or import. And there's a
right.
lot of mariculture stuff coming in. Like what is your
Yeah.
kind of acquisition and what do you kind of collect and try to get for yourself?
You know, with lately, and we kind of spoke about this before we started, but like when as farmer Ty, I was mainly an aquaculture guy. I was mainly just grow, collect these little pieces and grow them. And
Yeah.
when I partnered with my good friend Jake, who owns a local fish store locally, I got access through all his import partners to be able to get these mariculture colonies, be able to go to the facilities and just cherry pick and look.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different side that I've never was exposed to before. And it's amazing. It's amazing what we see come in. It's amazing, like you said, with the Malaysian imports we're getting right now. Papua New Guinea is starting to pull some stuff in.
Oh,
That's
cool.
another
Yeah.
market that they're kind of ramping up, as far as once access is better, that I think we'll see a lot more stuff come through there. So we're just seeing so many interesting things, and it's nice to be on the front lines of seeing them come in. So, but yeah, the access that we've gotten, the ones that we're seeing in, just beautiful, beautiful acros that we're seeing, just mushrooms that I've never even seen before. So it's been fun to be on the front line of a lot of these
Yeah.
things. And I think that we've been growing a little bit of a base of people that have kind of like, oh, you guys get to cherry pick and get to see all these things first. So they're pinging me. They're like, okay, when do you go? When do and when can you take pictures? And so they're super excited.
Yeah.
It's exciting for us, because, it can get, once you turn a hobby into a business, it can become routine and work-like. But when you got
Yeah.
people like,
Yeah.
hey, what new things did you get? I'm like, oh, let me show you my new toys. It's kind of like, oh, look at these new toys I
Yeah.
found. And they get
Yeah.
geeked out and they get excited over it. And I think that excitement kind of bounces back to us again and refreshes us, So
I was something, I mean, thinking about Malaysia, it's like Malaysia
yeah,
is not that far from Indonesia. And just think about the corals that they collected there, that like those
yeah,
speciosa just like blew my mind. The first time I saw one in
yeah.
person, I was like, that looks as good as the photos on the internet. Like, I don't think you can
Oh,
even Photoshop it and try to fake it because it looks
right.
that good. So it's like,
It,
what
it,
other
it looks
regions are
ridiculous.
around that have corals that we can't even imagine, the colors and what they look like, right?
Exactly. So it's very exciting to know that there's other possibilities out there. I think for because as a hobby, it can get, if you continue to have the same sources or continue to farm certain things, and I could see like people getting bored with the lack of variety over time.
Yeah.
But seeing these new Malaysians come in, or what's gonna come to from Papua New Guinea area, like it's just amazing. But yeah, like seeing the first speciosa, I'm like, just seeing the videos of them, I'm like, that's probably manipulated a little bit.
Yeah.
But then when I got to the wholesaler and I looked down at the like just a tank full of colonies at one importer, and I'm like, oh my God, like these
Yeah.
things are legit. The unfortunate thing you find out is they're as hard as hell to keep alive.
Yeah.
They're so persnickety, and I don't think as a hobby as we've keyed in on exactly what it is. I've seen some people have some success with it. We've had success with like one colony, but we've
Mhm.
four other ones we roasted right away. And
Yeah.
so it's these things that we're trying to figure out. And again, it's going to be a benefit to the full hobby once we nail it down. But being able to import them, get healthy pieces, and then acclimate them to our tanks, and then figure out what they prefer. So it's
Yeah.
been an interesting journey. So.
Yeah, I definitely have not seen any. I mean, we haven't had a lot of the Malaysian acros in Canada, but I haven't seen,
Yeah,
I don't think I've seen a single person that showed a picture of a colony that they said, hey, here's
they
my
grew.
colony of flaming sunrise that I grew from a 1 inch
Right,
frag,
right, right, right.
over a year or
So
two or whatever, right? Like
exactly, and that's
it's not
like
happening.
I don't like to sell false hope. That's not what myself or my partner we go with. I don't like to sell false hope. So if it's something that's like a speciosa that's like, hey, look, guys, like we got one in, it's growing, it's encrusting for us. It's a slow process. They don't
Mm.
grow that fast. They're a little persnickety. But certain people have had some success, but I can probably count them on under like two hands. And anything that they're growing are not like large colonies.
Yeah.
So my goal is, and the hope is to at least acclimate them enough that they're encrusting, and then get it out to people.
Yeah.
Because we only have one system, or I'm sorry, we have collectively in our setup, we probably have like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have like 6 systems right now, large systems. And so each one of them have their own nutrient levels, their own whatever parameters. And but that's it. So the more we can get these out the more other tanks and systems can experiment.
Yeah.
And so we can see what a better success is. It was like, oh, your phosphate is 0.3 and they're doing great.
Yeah.
Hey, that's
Yeah.
interesting. You know?
Yeah, it could.
So,
That's one of the beauties of doing what we do, where we have multiple systems and we can, and part
right.
of it is for backup and redundancy. It's like
Well, yeah, definitely.
sometimes you just want to throw it in another tank in case you lose it, but it
Right.
definitely is nice to just see what happens in different conditions.
Right.
Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
right. And so that's the exciting part of seeing these new things come in and being able to have multiple systems to test it. Because, average hobbyist is probably going to have his one system. So, hey, I bought a specios that died in my system. Okay, whatever it is, it doesn't work. But at least with us, we can cut it, put it in 6 different systems, and kind of see which one is faring the best, I guess. So,
Yeah. I mean, maybe another thing with these speciosa too is people. You haven't seen any big colonies because people are fragging them so fast because they want to make their money back
oh,
on their investment
right.
because they ain't cheap.
Yeah, they're not cheap, and then you end up if you don't do something fast with them, you end up with a dead white skeleton of expensive coral. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I get it too, but it hurts me as a like as a hobbyist, as a guy that loves aquaculture. It hurts me to see like these little frags on for sale that have like no encrustment. You can
Mhm.
tell they were just chopped up, and I'm like, oh, these have like zero success rate of surviving. Like
Yeah.
they're gonna go to whatever system and die immediately. So,
Yeah.
but
Well, I've seen a couple companies, I guess, over in the States that seem to be having pretty good success. BK Chem at Brooklyn, I think I've seen on their
yeah,
Instagram. He's got some stuff that looks like colonies that he's had for a while that he's grown and
yeah, and
propagated. And
so I don't know. Like I feel like he's not active anymore because I haven't seen
no, yeah, I
seen
haven't seen
much
him post for a while. Yeah.
posting. And I'm not about gossip or anything. Like I just haven't seen much postings from him lately. But yeah, his was on actually one of the first videos I saw, and I was like, oh,
Mhm. It's like
sweet
he's
mother,
got
what
it figured
is
out.
this?
Yeah. And I've seen SBB seems to have a pretty good handle on the
Yeah,
Malaysia stuff too.
yeah. It seems like he's got a couple here and there too as
Yeah.
well that I've seen pop up. So
Yeah.
it's been interesting. But like what we discussed, I've never seen someone keep cutting the same one that they've grown. So it
Mhm.
seems like it's a constant import in type of species. It's like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
growing it. They're just continually importing, cutting it up. And as far as I can see from when I was at the wholesalers, seems like there's about maybe 7 to 9 different varieties that have been coming in from Malaysia, at least that
Mhm.
we've had access to.
Yeah.
So,
With
as I
all
see
with
other
different
people,
names depending on who brought it
well, of
in.
course, of course, of course. I mean, that's how the hobby is. But
Yeah.
like I said, I've never seen anybody like we've discussed grow them and then cut from those growths. So
Yeah. Yeah.
then, like I said, a couple of people like I think Thirsty in California, he's had some pretty good success growing like cultured ones.
Yeah.
So if I was ever to
Yeah.
try some or want to try some, I'd buy a couple off of him that he's had grown for like 2 or 3 years now. So that's
Yeah.
that's the,
I guess
and that's
like
how it
this
starts.
this TSA smackdown that's going on right now would be a great coral to try to grow for those those people. It's like, here you go, try this fucking thing. Good luck.
Exactly.
I mean, most of
No,
the
it's
corals in that smackdown are like, I think, fairly easy to grow. Like, I don't think they're
yeah,
particularly challenging pieces. So it'll be interesting
right.
to see what happens with that.
Here,
Yeah. So you're
here's
talking
my
about
CCO.
yeah, you were talking about Papua New Guinea.
Yeah.
That's I haven't really heard about that, I don't think. So what have you seen kind of coming from there? Anything
So
particularly mind-blowing
it's
or promising?
it's mainly like murmurings right now, some whispers here and there, but we've seen at least from one of my partners, importers, that they at least imported some soft coral. And it's pretty new. I'm not even sure if they have the infrastructure to fully start sending large batches, but
Hmm.
we were able to get a couple of these like Papua New Guinea Yumas that first came out of there. And again, it's a soft coral, bunch of colors that I've never seen before. The size of those things were pretty large too, and I was like, "Well, this is interesting. I'm curious what else comes through." But I'll have to check with my partner lately, but we just haven't seen so much after that first initial shipped batch. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
if they're working on the logistics because, you know, there's so much logistics to deal with to get things across, but we'll
Yeah.
hope to see a lot more. So,
Yeah, because I know there was talk of, I think it was the Solomon Islands. There was some stuff coming in, some really cool millies.
yeah.
Yeah, and then I don't want to shit talk a specific country or region, but
Yeah.
I've seen orders come in from Tonga before, and I have not seen really anything all that nice from Tonga. And I don't know if it's just that it's a maybe a less developed industry, so they just haven't spent the time collecting and figuring out what's
Right.
nice yet. But I
Right.
haven't seen much come from Tonga that's been,
I'm with you on that. Like, I
you
don't know
know.
the backstory, but we don't order a whole lot of Tonga stuff just because, like you said, the stuff that comes in is not too exciting, I would say. So,
No, but I remember the Tonga live rock, and that was always that really cool, big, thick
oh yeah,
branch rock, and it was very unique. And I guess that sort of goes to show that, some of these regions that are, not too far apart in the world, have some pretty diverse variation. When you look at like Fiji rock versus Tonga rock, and I
right.
remember getting Vanuatu rock, like all these different rocks, and
Oh
they're
yeah,
very distinctively different, and they're coral,
okay,
right? Like they're old, grown out
right,
coral. So
right,
yeah, yeah.
right.
But
Yeah,
yeah, so I guess I'm talking about corals kind of ties a little bit into the future side of it too, because
yeah,
back to the subject. I mean, I kind of see a point where, depending on how the world goes and how the restriction of exportation goes, like there might be
yeah,
a time where we are not able to get coral overseas
right.
anymore. So I mean,
And
this is almost like the glory days of bringing stuff in and acquiring and collecting. And there may be a time where, what we have now is what we're going to have forever.
right, right. And you know,
you
that's
know?
I mean, that's very much on our minds as having businesses in the hobby. And we've gotten a taste of it. When Indo shut down for a little while, Australia has restricted a lot of collection as far as numbers, and so
Yeah.
we see a lot less Aussie stuff come in than we used to back in the heyday, where we're just seeing boxes and boxes of Aussie stuff come
Hmm.
in. And so yeah, there's definitely it's always in our mind, but so like you said, going to the subject of the future. So at least what we see, I just there's gonna be some time in the future where we're not gonna be able to import, and just like you said, this may be the heyday of us being able to collect all these different species and different type corals. So what I see in the future is really, and there's been a lot of talks on it, MACNA, but of actually breeding them of spot
Hmm. Hmm.
corals, and so that's kind of the big hot topic for the last couple of years, being able to do that. And so, I've had a random spawn here and there. I've had an acro one night. I'm just like, whoa,
Yeah.
what's going on? And it's just
Hmm.
releasing eggs. And I'm like, wow, I wish that would happen more regularly.
Hmm.
But it says something about your system as well. You're like, well, they're happy enough to reproduce. I'm doing something right.
If they have the
Uh,
energy to make eggs and sperm or whatever, they're
right.
definitely healthy if they got the
Yeah.
resources, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not all about survival anymore. They're like, oh, we can
Yeah.
stretch out, maybe work on some babies or something like that.
Totally.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
like just for us recently too, like in one system, the euphyllias had actually spawned,
Hmm.
and because I just started noticing all these little dots on my egg crate, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. And first thing you think is like, oh no, Aptasia, Mahano, what pest has like entered my system? And I looked in closer inspection, and they're baby euphyllias, they're baby torches.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as they grew out, I started removing them off the rack and gluing them on Frag plugs, and I have, Adam, about 100
Whoa.
little tiny
That's
torches.
awesome. Wow.
And so yeah, it's super cool because there was about 7 different varieties in that system,
Hmm.
and I'm pretty sure a couple of them hybridized, because I'm looking at some of these babies as they're gaining colors, and I'm like, I don't have that in my system.
Yeah.
Whatever
Yeah.
that is with the green speck and the gold, I'm like, that is nothing in this system. So it's interesting. So as we talk about the future for at least myself and my partner with Black Label is that we're actually specifically setting 2 systems aside that we hope to spawn corals.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
goal is Of course, we'll keep the torches in there with it, but our goal was to do acropora and start spawning acropora and keeping species together, like millies together, tenuous together, and just see
Mhm.
what kind of hybridized kind of spawn comes out of it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, could you imagine if like a home wrecker spawned with a Walt Disney and
Yeah. Yeah.
created something of mixed color of both? I mean, could you imagine
Yeah, I
that? So.
wonder as far as the genetics how if the species has to be the same or we're not sure. I mean, if you think about dogs, it's like a Chihuahua can breed with a Great Dane, so
Right.
it's it might be
But see,
possible.
so at least what we've, at least not we directly, but what we've been reading from literature is that like Meliopora have to be with Meliopora, tenuous
Mhm.
have to be with tenuous. So we have one spawn that's just an off species all by itself, like a
Yeah.
tortuga, and it's the only one in the system. It will never reproduce anything
Hmm.
sexual because
Hmm.
it doesn't have a partner. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so at least we know that much. But it's just getting the systems ready, setting the moonlight, temperature variations, all of that to signal to the corals to do their business. And then the
Yeah.
hard part is to keep them healthy enough, because if anybody here who has had an aquapora tank, or I'd just say in reef tanks in general, you ride that wave and you're like, I'm awesome, and then hey, what's happening, and then oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and hey, I'm rocking again, and that's
Yeah.
just the life of a reef tank
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes.
If it's doing awesome, you need to remind yourself that it is not always going to be doing awesome. There's always going to be a down.
Exactly.
It's just like life, though, right?
It is. It is. It's the funniest thing. I saw this little snippet of video, and it was like Tom Hanks, and it was like a couple of the actors sitting around a round table. I don't even know what the setup was, but the what he said is like, I wish I knew when I was younger, and what I knew now, but like this shall pass. So if you're doing great and your career is amazing and everything, this shall pass. And if you're doing
Yeah,
terrible and you're in the dumps and you're at the low part of your life, this too shall pass.
it's
So
true.
like,
Yeah,
I look at reefing as that. I'm like, this rocks. Everything's just happy right now, growing frags left and right. This shall pass.
it's
And
definitely like appreciate the moments when it's doing well and be patient
exactly.
when it's not doing well. And if you're patient and if you know do the right things, like whatever they may be, you'll probably get back on a better track
Yeah,
again.
hopefully to turn back to where it is.
Yeah.
And I'd say that in anybody like yourself or myself that's been in the hobby long enough, it's a hobby of resilience. It's a hobby
Mhm.
of keeping the fight going. It's not a hobby of I'm so smart and I can grow anything. I'm a reefing god. It's not that. No, it's
Oh,
this screwed up. How do I recover from it and be patient with it? No,
it's
that's I think
continually
that's
humbling. I mean, I know I've had a crash before
yes.
where I lost a lot of stuff, and it was a low point in my life. But I was just looking at photos the other day of like I don't know 4 months after that crash, and I was able
Yeah,
to recover a lot of stuff. I was able
that's
to
good
acquire a
timing.
bunch of new colonies from
Yeah.
friends and people that I know kind of around the area, and just
Yeah.
looking at that, I was like, within a year, I was better off than I was, at that
Right.
point.
Right.
So.
Bank buddies are very important. You have
Mhm.
your bank buddies.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I guess a good question we can kind of move on. Is
Yeah.
there like a change or a product, something that you did that you would say like you really can attribute like say it was like the only thing you did at the time. Is there something you can really attribute like a positive change to that you've seen like in your systems?
So, like technology or is it
I'm gonna
methodology?
say more like something you were dosing or
Okay.
something that would affect coral health or just the biology of the system overall.
Yeah, I mean, the easy one for me is definitely calcium reactors. I don't know if we want to go that basic, but just having a clear, stable alkalinity and
Hmm.
calcium, your foundation, and then dose the magnesium when needed. But that alone, once I installed a calcium reactor, or two-part dosing, all the same. But once I did that, it was leaps and bounds, at least for my system, because the stability alone was just everything to the coral because,
Mm.
at least for me, when they're super stable like that, you could grow frags. It's amazing. I used to just cut off my Oregon tort, which is known to be a slow grower, and in a month's time, boom, right
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And you just is like I never had that success until I actually put a calcium reactor on there or two-part dosing, anything to just keep it stable. And so that was like the big aha moment for me back when I was getting started.
Yeah.
Uh, lately for me now, nutrient levels, being able to
Yeah.
just put it right where you want it. So you're dosing nitrates and having the drip constantly from a apex dose or something, or even phosphates if needed, which is rare. I've never really had to do it too much on the phosphate side, but just being able to keep that solid line of nutrients was a big deal because then I realized I'm like, oh, well, every once in a while something happens, system gets thrown off, you have an algal bloom or cyano bloom, and you don't realize. Oh, you're thinking the algae affects it? Yes, it does. Cyano affects it? Sure, of course.
Mhm.
Dinos, definitely. But the side effect that sometimes I didn't realize before was that the nutrient uptake. When it sucked the nutrients out of the water, so the corals are kind of starving in a sense. And so the
Yeah.
minute you squash the algae, all of a sudden nutrients shoot up because there's nothing uptaken
Yeah.
anymore. So
Literally get the algae out of the system so it's
right,
not
right.
competing. Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you have high nutrients because they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
No,
just that,
for sure.
that fight. And so I was like, I never realized my fight. I always thought my fight would be alkalinity and calcium and magnesium. I didn't realize further down the road, my real fight is nutrient levels.
Hmm.
It's just having
Hmm.
that solid line.
Well, and
But once you stable,
that would be like a little bit of a testament to the calcium reactor too, because if you're using
yeah,
reborn or like a crushed coral media, like you're
yeah,
getting some phosphates from that media too, and it's on
right,
a very
right.
constant basis, right? So
It is,
that
yes.
might have been a big part of the change, but
Yeah, and so I would contribute that if I had to lean towards two-part dosing versus a calcium reactor. That to
yeah,
me, those trace elements that come in with the media and the little bits of phosphates, I just found it was definitely added more to the system than just simple direct alkalinity or calcium. So
hmm, hmm,
definitely, if anybody's on the fence of two-part dosing a calcium reactor, I would push them to calcium reactor all the way. So.
yeah, and I would actually I'm going to do like a fact check episode every once in a while, so this is something I want to put a note on, but I want to see what trace elements are actually in calcium reactor media because
Yeah.
some of the trace elements that corals use is in the tissue, so it's not going to be in the skeleton. But
Right.
I'd imagine those,
Right.
we've got calcium carbonate, magnesium, strontium. Some of those harder
Right.
elements are going to be in there, but
Yes.
either way,
Yeah.
yeah. I actually one of my systems that only runs a calcium reactor, I dose faunamarin elements AB
Oh
because
yeah.
basically they figured out what other elements are not going to be coming out of your reactor
Oh yeah. And
media.
that calcium activists. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and my ICPs are pretty good on that tank. So, um, yeah. But
Yeah.
are you doing regular ICPs on any of your systems?
I wouldn't say regular, but we tried. We try like at least twice, 2 to 3 times a year. We'll definitely more
Yeah,
so if anything looks a little off. It's one of those like you had mentioned earlier. Ignorance is bliss sometimes.
yeah,
Kind of get stuck in the, oh, what's low? My strontium's low. Maybe I should bring that up. And then all of a sudden, an acro colony poofs on me, and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have brought that. So I just
yeah,
if everything's happy, even though it says something is zero, I'm not gonna mess with it. So that's why I didn't want to get
yeah,
too deep dived into the ICP results, because I didn't want to affect what I'm seeing in person. I was like, well, if everything looks
yeah.
great, happy, I'm not gonna mess with it. So.
For sure. I mean, I've been doing adjustments based on my ICPs, but I definitely undershoot a little bit. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes I'm surprised how fast you can raise something by. And I mean, I'm sure like these companies have it dialed in, but I'd rather stay on the lower side. And
Right.
I think something is better than nothing when it comes to any
Right.
particular element. Like
With you, man.
iron is pretty much always zero for me. I don't know about your ICPs. Have you seen iron on them?
It is usually pretty low on my side too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. That seems to be one of those elements that I think any sort of algae or like the zooxanthellae in the corals seems to make use of it pretty fast.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here. What are some other good questions? Oh, so this has come up a little bit lately because I've had kind of a little bit different answers depending on who I've talked to. But what's your stance
Oh yeah.
on amino acids?
So, I did the experiment with aminos when they were first kind of being marketed a little bit more. Like, a lot of different manufacturers are creating their own amino concoctions to
Yeah.
sell those. Um, so at least from my own experience, and just this is only my take on it, but if you had plenty of fish and you're feeding your system pretty regularly and fully, I didn't see a benefit in those tanks. But in a
Hmm.
system that was like very low on bio load, didn't have a lot of fish, there wasn't a lot of activity going on, not a lot of feedings, those that I added aminos to rocked. It
Hmm.
just it was great for the system. So that's the takeaway that I took from it was that if you have plenty of biodiversity, if you have a lot of bio load, or you're feeding constantly but exporting enough so that's not an issue, that I didn't see as much of a gain from aminos in those
Yeah,
systems.
I
So
would agree. I've only really seen a big difference when my nutrient levels were lower, kind of back in the
right,
day. But yeah, Leonardo's Reef, he told me that amino acids get converted into nitrates fairly
yeah,
quickly.
right,
So it's like it's kind of a little bit like the vitamins being expensive pee kind of thing. Like
yeah,
it's like you're yeah, sure, it's doing a thing that maybe your tank
yeah.
needs,
Was
but
that
there might be a
little peak
cheaper way to
down?
do
So
it. Add some more fish, feed a little more. Yeah.
exactly. So like, I'm a big proponent of like the big fish population and feeding healthy, like feeding the tank a lot. And that's,
Hmm.
to be honest, a little snippet from when we even just a lesson learned for us when my partner and I were setting up new systems is that we forget how much you want to feed a system initially to kind of get some of these biological microprocesses going. So
Hmm.
like we were just forgetting to feed and forgetting to feed, and immediately the uptake of all the nutrients, and then algae starts growing, and it's like, but when people see algae, everyone freaks out, and I'm like, well, just push through it because it's a new system
Hmm.
that once we realized just keep feeding, just keep feeding, just keep feeding, and the system cycled so much faster. The corals were so much happier in a newer system when we just kept feeding the system. So I think that's a lesson learned for us, or a takeaway for us, is starting new systems. And this may help a lot of new hobbyists as they go, but feed those systems. Don't be too afraid of that.
Hmm.
You can adjust the nutrients as you go, but feed them. Don't starve them.
Yeah, I
So
agree. And don't necessarily keep your skimmer on 24/7 either. It's
right,
like,
right.
I've seen people set up new systems and they're like, my skimmer is just hardly doing anything. It's like, that's because there's nothing in there for it to
There's nothing
skim.
in there.
It's like, it's telling you, it's literally saying, hey, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm working over here, but
yeah.
I mean, I don't think you need me
Right.
for a
It's
little
like
while.
this is a desert. It's just like there's nothing there. It's like a reef desert you got
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no. All of the stuff it's skimming out is probably stuff that the tank realistically will utilize,
yeah,
especially if you've got some corals in
we'll
there.
probably need.
Hmm.
Right, right. So definitely interesting, but
So, what do you guys what's your quarantine protocol look like between the shop and your? I assume you have systems at home as well. Like there's the shop and
yeah,
then some
yeah.
systems at home. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to. So the goal is, because I was so heavy aquaculture. So the goal was to get everything to one location. So we wanted everything to the shop because it just makes more sense once you're shipping and fragging and doing that. You need everything at one location. So our goal was to get all of my colonies, all of my stuff, livestock, at least a portion of it to the shop, and then
Hmm.
keep backups at my systems at home. So I had the additional backups at home, and then convert one of the systems I have at home into the future
Hmm.
spawning, like getting
Yeah.
into that and experimenting with that system. So but going back to your question as far as quarantining and those processes, again, lesson learned for us because I've been such an aquaculture guy that it's simple. You bring in new pieces, you dip them, you put them in. I had a backup system that I would, and as a fully running functioning aquapora system, mature. So I put them in there and observe, dip them maybe a couple more times before anything. And then as they grow, then I would clip a piece and move it to my main system. And so
Yeah.
that was
So
always
just a piece.
yes,
Just a
yes. So
piece.
that was
Yeah.
my process on my side. But lesson learned for us is in our new systems that we set up at the shop, everything's going good. We cycle, we're getting corals in there and they're happy. And then we start importing and bringing new pieces in and we're dipping them as we go. And we do have a receiving tank, but they don't stay in there too long because, quality wise, it's not as stable as the main
Yeah.
systems that we have. But what we've realized is that as I brought stuff that was cultured over, and then we had imported stuff that went through their quarantine processes and ended up in the same system, all of a sudden we had this kind of bacterial fight. And that's the best that I can put it as describing it. But I'd have cultured colonies of Goniopora, and I made like 20 frags of it, took it to that system. And then we had an imported gorgeous Goni that we brought in doing well in one system. And finally, 3, 6 months later, we're like, okay, we fragged it up. It's still doing great. We move it to the same system as my cultured Gonis, and all of a sudden, boom, like it was just
all the Ghanies were having issues, or just the other type?
Some bacterial incompatibility, some pets. You just don't know. To me, it's some bacterial incompatibility, but the minute those two, they weren't even near each other, but we put them in the same system, and the wild bacteria, I guess, with the ones that were freshly imported versus the cultured Gonies that I've had for 5, 6 years plus, they wiped them out. Both of them wiped out. They were complete.
No.
The skeletons started, and you've never even seen that before. But Gonies, full on flesh would just peel off the skeleton like that, and we're just like, what is happening? And so we've made it very strict policy now to completely separate anything imported and completely can separate anything cultured. They never mix. So we never mix it from this point on.
Okay.
Because we've not just noticed it in Gonies. We've noticed it in mushrooms. We've noticed it in Euphilia. And we've noticed it in Acropora. So now we just keep systems entirely separate. If this is imported, that's where this system is. If they're cultured, that's where this is. And again, it just could be my system. My cultured pieces have gotten used to a certain way, a certain bacteria culture in my systems. And then when they mixed with the Marys or the wild pieces, it just didn't work out. And they died off, and they all died off. So again, lessons learned for us. So now we keep everything separate, and we will always continue to do that in our systems. So
interesting. Yeah, I wonder if you could kind of reset the biome of the coral from, an antibiotic dip. Obviously, that's kind of a hot debated topic right now.
Yes,
have you done any bacterial treatments on any specific corals?
We've experimented. Because we use I used to use Cipro a lot for like the Colorado sunburst anemones. That was just one of the big things you could do to kind of save them because they had a similar issue. They were a cultured anemone, 10 years of lineage plus on these things. They've been growing captive for forever. And then, but there was such a low success rate. And initially we couldn't figure out why. And we were like, oh, they're just sensitive. And it's like, well, they're bubble tips. I mean, you can slice them in a blender and you end up with 5 of them, And so why are these sunbursts dying left and right? And so we finally figured it out as a community that they should not mix with other anemones. And we didn't know why, we could think like toxicity or, was it chemical attacks on each other?
Yeah, it could be some kind of chemicals, yeah.
Yeah, but in the end of the day, to me, it was bacterial. It was just wild bacteria, and the culture ones have gotten used to whatever strain is in our systems, and the wild stuff comes in and just destroys their microbiome, and poof, they're gone. And you can literally see that if you take a Colorado sunburst and you mix it with any anemone that's maybe wild or not as cultured as long, and within a month, that Colorado sunburst will lose all its color, turn brown, and then start hiding and shrivel away and die. And so once we figured out that was the issue, people kept them separate. And now we've had such great success with Colorado
Hmm.
sun.
You're kind of
So I
selling them.
see
You kind of need to have a disclaimer on the website, right? You have to say like,
literally,
don't keep these with these because
right?
you know.
And that's why,
Yeah.
like, anybody orders it, I'm like, do you have other anemones? And yes or no. It's like, okay, yes, I suggest you don't purchase this then. It's like we're pretty
Hmm.
upfront with people when they buy one. And so that to me is the interesting part of what we're seeing with the new collection sites. Like when we talk about Malaysian corals, keep a Malaysian only tank, and they're great. You take that speciosa and you mix it in with even a happy acro tank, like say one of your systems, and you put that healthy, happy speciosa in there, and maybe some bacteria incompatibility is the reason why those
Hmm.
specioses don't survive. Because I see them at the importer and they're only in a Malaysian tank and they look great. And
Hmm.
at a certain point, I think I saw one system that had them for 2 months and they were still doing great. And 2 months with this brand new speciosa colony is kind of a big deal. so,
Yeah.
so I'm
Yeah.
like, something is working here.
Yeah.
And to me, like, just putting the pieces together, it's all Malaysian. So
Yeah.
the bacteria culture is all Malaysian. So
Yeah.
the
I wonder if there's
so
something to that. I mean, at the end of the day,
yeah,
people want to have a mixed reef with,
sure.
corals from different regions. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's almost like, thinking about, Spanish explorers going to North America and spreading
perfect.
diseases. It's like, they hadn't adapted to that. There's just something
Right,
different about that, because maybe it's not a disease, but it's a bacteria that's foreign to that
right,
coral
right.
tissue, and the coral is just kind of like, I don't really like this. This is not good for
Yeah.
me. I'm
Well,
out.
we're spreading the smallpox. Like we got
Yeah,
smallpox everywhere, going in every reef tank from Malaysia. Like it very much
yeah.
could be something like that. And so that's why we've become very strict in our systems to keep these things separately. We might not isolate Australia and Indo because they had a history of working out well together. People have imported
Hmm.
Aussie and Indo together for many years now.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
Malaysian, if we get Malaysian in, that's separate. We
yeah.
don't even mix that. So
Well, and I think
uh,
some of the interesting morphs and kind of maybe some of those green fluorescent protein infections are kind of a result of us keeping corals
oh,
in the same tank that
uh,
are
yeah,
from different regions. And
yeah.
one thing I was talking about with someone was, is there something to be said for, say, completely bleaching a healthy coral, so all the zooxanthellae is ejected, and then putting
Okay.
it with other corals from different
Yeah.
regions? Would it
All
populate
right.
with a different zooxanthellae that maybe has a different look to it?
Yeah,
No.
that would be interesting because I mean they pull it from the water column, so they colonize their zooxanthellae from the water column, as far as I understand. So
Mhm.
it's a
Yeah.
possibility, but bleaching them,
I
I mean, you're
mean,
getting as close to death as possible. It's like, hey, suck in some new colors, guy. Like
yeah, yeah.
so.
What was that product? It was a Zeovit product. I think it was called Zeospur or something like that.
Oh yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah.
that was
It
an
was
interesting, actually, kind of going back to the past for a second. I remember
yeah.
the Zeovit thing. It
Oh yeah.
was it was interesting because it was like these really pastel corals, but the colors were bright. I mean, at least on the
Oh yeah.
examples of the good Zeovit
Like the
systems.
fluorescent colors were bright. Yeah, the
Yeah,
fluorescent
but
definitely bright. The base
to
colors were very light, but
to me, like I would never, I don't think I would be able to keep corals that light
mm,
over time and keep them
yeah.
healthy. I mean, I think the
Just like you're dancing
concept,
that line.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally riding that line. And the concept was that the coral is getting more of its energy from bacteria, which is converting nitrates
Right.
and phosphates into a form that the polyp can use for food, and a little bit less
Right.
reliant on the energy it's getting from the symbiotic algae.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
but I mean, yeah, I'm
I
glad
always,
that that's not popular anymore because
yeah. When people used to ask about that, I was like, and it's probably a terrible analogy, but like, I always akined it to like, I was like, when you do that, you're like, it's like a supermodel, you know, like they're towing the line of like health and
yeah,
beauty, like
yeah,
is that super skinny model? Is that the healthiest person out there, or is it like someone with a little thickness to them is a
yeah.
health bit healthier? And so, in that sense, it's like that coral is like at the edge of its beauty, but also at the edge of its health too. So I'm
Mhm.
just it just seems like a quick little flip of one parameter and poof, the whole
Yeah.
thing's gone.
Yeah.
So
I find the same
suits.
with sometimes corals when they come in. They might be a
Yeah.
little bleached from shipping, but they can look really
Yeah.
rad,
Oh yeah.
especially millies. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where like as a guy who gets to comb through imports, that's
Mhm.
where when my first adventure to go into a facility and I was like, look at all these colors. And then you learn over time. You're like, that doesn't stay. That's
Yeah,
just
totally.
all the
Totally.
Zooxanthellae, it's starved, all the colors are there, but it's just a starved acro that needs to be acclimated again.
Yeah.
So
And there's something about that ocean water that, I mean, there's a certain kind of vibrance and, I don't know, metallic sheen that,
yeah.
I don't know if, some of the moonshiners guys that are like absolutely
Yeah.
on point, are
Yeah.
probably pulling some of those colors, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say that's that absolute fine tuning point that's,
Hey.
super tricky. So
Yeah.
you haven't messed around with trace elements too much, like, as far as
I mean,
based on your ICPs. So your ICPs are more, kind of to check there aren't any heavy metals in
yeah.
the system.
Just
Uh,
just to make sure. Yeah,
yeah,
just to make sure. I maybe I should rely on it more. It just I've done things a certain way and I've had a certain amount of success and I don't want to stray too far from that, just straying from my roots. So I
mm,
think as long as I continue to have success, I may not ever rely on it. But that's what the beauty of having multiple systems is that maybe we'll give it a shot on one system and
yeah.
kind of see if we see any differences on our side. So
Yeah, I mean, something I would say about the moonshiners method too is that,
yeah,
like, no new hobbyist is getting into doing moonshiners. Nobody from the
right,
start of setting up their very first reef tank is like, okay, I'm going to do, apparently this is good. I'll do moonshiners. It's like all
yeah,
the people that are doing moonshiners already had awesome tanks,
right.
and then it might have just made that little, like, extra difference.
Maybe that little
Yeah.
tweak or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, at least had the basis there and it was successful already, and
Yeah.
then just a little tweak on top. So,
Yeah.
uh, but like again, as long as we've lasted in this hobby, I've gotten more in trouble with the tweaks that I've made. All the little tweaks that I've tried to do. I've killed more
Yeah.
corals doing that than I am just leaving it alone. So I'm
Yeah.
just
Do you
so
have a good example of something that maybe it'll be a good
oh man.
I mean, you don't want to relive it,
Those
but
examples. What was the one that I got? It was a sulfur reactor.
hmm,
I got into one of those, and I was like, oh, this is a great way to remove, control my nutrients or whatever, and I gave it a try, and something with the setup, I didn't have things correctly dialed in, and it was just dumping noxious gases into my system because it
mm,
wasn't correctly tuned,
yeah.
and within like 2 days, all my acros started turning black, like almost black. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And by the time
Whoa.
I killed the reactor off, it already had its effect on the system. So
Yeah.
it was like a 4 to 6 month recovery, lost a lot of stuff through that process too. And I was just like, why did my nutrient levels were fine? I was just finding a different way. I was leaving bio pellets to move to something else. And I
Hmm.
was like, if it works, why mess with it? But I just got caught
Yeah.
up in new thing. Let me try this out. So
Yeah, and that's another thing I think, is if you're switching a method. I was talking to Unorthodox Reef Jay about this. If you're switching
yeah.
methods, he switched to a calcium reactor from two part, and we were talking
Yeah.
about how, it was a thing where it wasn't just like I'm turning off my dosing and I turned on this reactor.
Right.
He gradually kind of dialed the reactor in slowly, started to turn
Yeah,
the
ran
doses
both.
down, and it was just like a give and take until it was dialed. And it's like
Right.
that's what you got to do if you're going to make a
Yeah.
change, especially to something kind of major like that. Make sure you just take it slow, like slower than you
Right.
think, even.
Yeah, I mean, you think like, I mean, they're so used to a certain way of life. It's like if we got used to a certain way and all of a sudden someone came in and it's like, oh, you can't have beer and pizza anymore. And you're like, what? Like, not that it would like be detrimental to my health. It'd probably be better for my health, but it just a sudden shock and change of a certain lifestyle. You're like, what? What's
Yeah,
happening? So
yeah,
I could see the corals doing the same thing, you change up their livelihood and they like react to it. So,
yeah.
uh,
As far as parameters, would
yeah.
you say there's anything out of your parameters that you do a little bit outside of what would be typical? I mean, I think most people listening to this podcast are gonna kind of understand the alkalinity ranges and what. So, is there anything you think is a little bit different?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's any like magical thing that I do that's different or anything that I keyed in on. I do definitely like to keep my magnesium a little higher, but I don't like
Yeah,
toning that line. All the mixes put us at like 1280, which I think is the minimum to me.
yeah,
And
I
and I
agree.
wish it was higher. I wish they would put us all at 1350 to 1400.
Yeah,
So I do try to keep my magnesium a little higher just for that because you got a calcium drop off of 420, you get down to 380 and you're still good.
yeah,
Just bring it
fine.
back
Yeah,
up. But the minute your magnesium drops off at 1280, I mean, again, probably my system, but I can immediately point to two acros that are immediately going to start STNing if I get below
Hmm.
1280. And
Yeah,
so I'm telling myself, like, why dance that line so tight? So I try to keep a high magnesium. But
yeah.
that's really it, I would say.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed magnesium to be a big thing for LPS, especially like
Yeah.
torches, like most LPS. But
Yeah.
yeah, have you noticed on ICP tests? I've noticed that
Yeah.
my ICP tests have a higher magnesium, quite a bit higher than my Salford, and I really do trust Salford. But I wonder if
Yeah.
that's a universal thing.
I wonder that too because even, I've gotten lazier in my days and kind of rely on Trident a little bit more. And
Mhm.
so whatever my Trident reads, but then I send in and I record my values, and I'm like, it's always like 50 to 75 higher when I get my ICP
Yeah,
tests.
yeah.
And
Same with
I'm
me.
like,
Yeah,
that's
up to
interesting.
100 even. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now I most recently got the Hannah magnesium after the whole botched reagent thing that they did with the initial rollout, but
Mhm.
new reagents that they got are doing better. And so I'm curious on my next ICP, I'll take an example with the Hannah and see where I'm sitting at compared to
Yeah.
the Trident and the ICP.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not
Yeah.
sure why it always reads higher, so that's funny that you reported that too. But
Yeah, it's nice to know that you're like, I mean, people talk smack about hobby grade kits, but honestly, like, I mean,
yeah,
I think that most of the Salifert kits are great. Like, I
I trust them.
so
Yeah,
many times I test my Trident against my Salifert kits. I try to test about every probably once a week with Salifert and
yeah,
not just completely rely on the Trident. And I
yeah,
find it's usually within about 10 ppm when it comes to the calcium,
yeah.
alkalinity
Right.
is close, so
Yeah.
do you ever test potassium?
I do actually, and
Yeah,
I use the Salford one if
yeah,
I can remember. Right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
Salford one. It's the only one I what was the one I bought before? Was it Red Sea or something?
The Red
It
Sea
was an
one
awful.
seems weird. Yeah, it's that multi
It was an
kit.
awful process, like
Yeah,
filtering through a micron. I was just
yeah.
like, what am I doing? So I went with the Salford one, and it seems pretty spot on because
Yeah,
I'll notice things. I'm trying to remember. Was it like 400 or something? Like we try to keep it
yeah,
around, or
400. Yeah,
um, sorry, I'm a little loopy. I don't get much sleep
yeah.
these days with
Long
the
day. Hey,
kids.
it's late for you right now. Anyways, what is it, 11 o'clock?
Well, I average about 5.5 hours with the kids, so I'm just like I
Oh.
don't get much sleep. So, but yeah, so like what I've noticed is typically the salt mixes have been keeping me like I use Red Sea Blue Bucket,
Mhm.
and so it keeps me pretty good about 390, sometimes
Yeah,
400. Yeah, it's the weird thing though, like once in a blue moon, and it's only my main system and not my backup system, but once in a blue moon, my potassium just drops in my main
hmm
system. And I have not been able to figure out if it's an uptake issue, if something is just growing and uptaking on the potassium, but out of nowhere, it'll ride 400, 400, 400, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, 360.
yeah,
And I notice it because there's a certain acro that I always key in on, and I'm like, what? Oh, no, let me test my potassium. And I'll test
yeah,
it. Sure enough, it's low, and I'm like, what?
yeah.
So that was, I would say, as we were discussing, whoever's listening on, but like, that is the one element that I feel should be thrown up there with the big three.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
And it is a major element. It's 400 ppm. It's the same amount
hey,
as calcium, pretty much.
yeah. And it's just one of
So,
those things that once I keyed in on it and making sure that it was correct in my tanks, that like I at
mhm.
least So my acros, they were a lot happier. And it's not like they weren't happy, but it was just that little next level. I'm like, oh, they're like super happy now. So I always
Yeah.
try to key in on it. But I mean, most of the time, your regular salt mix or food, like throwing in nori, it's got potassium in it, like those
Yeah.
things that you do to feed, it should keep your levels where it should be. But like I said, just once in a blue moon, it's always that main system and it drops to 360. And I'm like, what? And you can see it in acros. And so,
Mhm.
like, if anybody's listening on, alk, calcium, magnesium,
Potassium.
throw that
Yeah.
potassium on there.
Yeah,
So, for
definitely.
sure.
I mean, I would say I would put iodine up there in terms of importance, but one of the unfortunate things with iodine is I don't think there's a good kit out there.
There's a horrible kids. They're all horrible. Like, you're just like this yellowish pea color
Yeah.
versus this lighter yellowish color. And I'm like, I can never tell the difference. So,
Yeah.
it's just so hard for me to test for. I'm just afraid to dose it. So, but yeah, it's one of those that's like I feel like it's rapidly depleted in our systems, like
Mhm.
super rapidly depleted. So,
Yeah.
I see the benefits of dosing it. So,
Definitely something that if you know, say if you don't do ICPs super often, but you know your system uses it, like just put in like a
yeah,
drop or two
yeah,
a day or every couple days, just
yeah.
so there's
The sum
something.
is better than
Yeah,
nothing.
something's better
Like
than
you,
nothing. It's a good.
some,
I mean, Jake does the Jake thing was saying, some amount of some level of this is better than absolutely nothing. So
right, right.
yeah,
They use it, so just put something in the water.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be a desert of it. So,
yeah,
but yeah,
for sure. So let's talk about pH a little bit, and
yeah,
because if you're running calcium reactors, are you doing calc as well, or are you just
yes,
so you are okay? Yeah, I feel like that kind
yes.
of goes hand in hand these days for people
It has to.
that are doing
Yeah.
reactors. Yeah. So what's
And I don't
your
think it's created enough. Like, I don't think it's in the discussion enough when people say calcium reactors, but it should almost immediately be followed with, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
from
yeah.
my experiences with it, definitely run calc with it. It was a funny story. So, I'm sure you guys, a good buddy of mine, he's in Florida, goes by the handle of Bubba Q. But big SPS guy, we became good buddies online and chat all the time. But it's funny anecdote about pH. So he like hit me up and he's like, "Man, what do you think about pH?" And this is like I think 5-6 years back, and I'm like, "Oh, it's junk. Like it's you don't need to worry about that. That's not going to affect anything of growth,
Yeah.
Acropora." Because I recently read this like article about like how Acropora can like create this microenvironment of pH where it's higher at its growth rate. So like in a certain area where it's growing, it can actually micro manipulate that pH
It
level.
does its own
Like,
chemistry in its tissue.
right.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I was like, so it doesn't even matter. And I was telling him, and I said, that's just junk theory. That's just one of those things that people are trying to trend on. And then I actually like bumped up my pH, did like, the little, the media to kind of pull out the carbon dioxide out of the system
Hmm.
and bump your pH even higher. And almost instantly, I saw a higher growth rate. So
Yeah,
like
you see your
my
alkalinity dropping. Yeah, you're like,
yeah, and I was like, well, I'll be damned. And so,
yeah.
I ate crow on that one, and I hit him back up. I'm like, you were right, man. You were right. So from that point on, he's been giving me crap about it once in a blue moon and reminding me. He's like, remember when you said pH didn't matter? And I'm like, yeah. I remember that. So, but
So what is your range kind of from day to day? What's your low and your high
you know,
on your main system?
So lows probably about 8.1 to roughly a little bit hair lower than that, and the high is about 8.3, and I try to keep it around that range. So actually, I have my calc dosing on the pH level a little bit as well, so it'll dose a
Mhm.
little bit more as it gets lower. I wouldn't recommend that with everybody because then your
Mhm.
alcohol starts getting a little crazy, but I've been able to maintain it pretty well. But yeah, that's the range I aim for. And on top of telling my kids not to breathe too much in the house, I'm like, quit breathing so much. You're taking my pH levels
Yeah,
down.
don't get any
guys."
bigger and don't breathe anymore. Just stay the same size. Get out of
Stay
here.
small. Stay small. But I've benefited that like in our house we happen to have a room that's completely separate for the fish room, and I put my
Nice.
own little mini split in there. So we try to keep the air separated from in there, so I don't get too much swings. But it was funny back in the day when we had just my display and before I was doing all the growing and selling and aquaculture, I just had a display system that I had, it was Apex. I first installed my Apex within that first year. And I had a big old party. I think it was like my big 30th
Yeah,
party.
yeah.
Probably had like 80 people in the house. And I was watching my like Apex and my alarm started going off. pH was just zzz, like
Oh, yeah.
nosedived. And I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. So, opened up the doors and everything. But it was just so cool to see. It's just like, this is a direct effect of the
Yeah.
environment
Very
around it.
direct.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
wild to see. But
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, yeah, for sure. Like you said, corals just grow faster in higher pH. It's a little bit like,
yes.
I think if you relate it to, say, the farming world or something like that, it's like plants grow fast in greenhouses. It's
Right.
warmer.
Right.
I think, I don't know. I'm curious if higher salinity grows corals a little bit faster too. I mean, essentially, you're speeding up the metabolism of everything.
Yeah.
Hot
Yeah.
if you run system warmer, higher pH, higher salinity.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know, like, yeah. I mean, we used to
Yeah.
kind of run our tanks warmer, right? Like I used to run my tank,
Yeah. Well,
80
we
to
didn't have a
83.
choice.
Yeah,
The
that's
metal
true.
halide was like boiling the water right
Yeah.
about it. We really didn't have a choice. So, I mean, we were doing the opposite. Now we're trying to warm up our tanks with the LEDs. And back then we had like insurmountable amount of chillers that were trying to cool our water and doing the opposite. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I remember running like 82, 83 with the metal halides.
Mhm.
And they were fine. But I think the other side of the coin is you increase that metabolism, but you also increase like growth rates of algae.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like with your higher temperatures, sure you can grow out corals faster, but an algae bloom can just blow up much quicker
Yeah.
as well. So
And
there's a
anything
lot.
like that, it's that riding the line thing. I mean, we even though the ocean, the alkalinity is what, 6.8 or somewhere in
Right.
there, it's like, yeah, but I'm going to keep my alka at 8 to 8.5 because if something happens and it drops quickly, I don't want it going down to 4.
Yeah.
It's only going
Yeah.
to go down
Exactly.
to 7 or 7.5.
Exactly.
And
There
same
was
with
there was
temp, right? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. What is an average? But like the variability of temps on most reefs is a big range. I mean, they're going from like 73 sometimes up to like 83, and this is over a seasonal period. But like
hmm,
the temperature ranges that the corals been going through is crazy. So when we look
yeah,
at these models to set up for spawning to mimic these seasonal changes over the years, I've actually like was looking into decreasing the range. You
hmm,
know, it can go from like 72 in one season up to 84 in the summer season as a temperature. But I'm like, I'm not running 84 in my tank. So, I just
yeah.
take two notches down and my high will be like 82, 83, and my low will be like 75, 76, and keep that range a little tighter because I don't want to stress it out because, like I said, our systems are made up of so many different corals from so many different regions.
Hmm.
Some may not appreciate, like 73, and
No, for
others
sure.
will die when you get to anywhere near 82, 83. So.
Yeah, and I something I kind of thought about when I was in Bali back in February, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's highly seasonal there. Like you've got the rainy
Yeah.
season where there's like probably bigger swings in salinity, like
That's what I was
all the
curious.
runoff, all the murky stuff that's coming off in the rivers, and like
Yeah.
one of the main I think it's Sarangan is one of the main places where a lot of the farms are in Bali, and
Yeah.
I got there a little bit like when the tide was coming up, and it was like murky and dark, and like it did not seem like a place. If I was a coral in a pristine, crystal clear water
Yeah.
tank, it'd be like, get me out
Yeah.
of here. But
You're
I
like, how
mean,
can I grow in that?
but it makes you wonder, like, should we, you know, put a little bit more variety into our systems, like run a couple days a
Right.
month where the lights are 30% lower, 40% lower, and even when it comes to feeding, it's like, you have your regular amount you probably normally feed, but maybe like skip a day here and then add twice as much food here on this day. Like, just, because that's kind of more what it would be like in the wild, right? Like, are we too pampering and too
They
consistent?
have such a buffer though. Like the natural ocean
Yeah.
has such a huge buffer that we don't get to have in our 100-gallon system or our 20-gallon nano, you
Hmm.
overfeed one day in a nano and you're shot. That
Yeah.
phosphate's point 0.6 and things are dying. So it's like, but no, I agree with you. Like, at least back then when we had metal halides, we had no choice but to go from 80 to 83. It was
Yeah.
a daily influx of this temperature. What nowadays I can hold my temperature static if I wanted to, but I
Hmm.
still allow it to
Yeah.
raise one or two. But
Yeah.
yeah, the variability. I got a good buddy down the street. He's an SPS guy too, and he's an environmental scientist like I used to be as well. And so we
Hmm.
geek out and we talk and we joke about these things. But he's had so many different things happen to his systems over the years that he jokes about. He's like, oh, all my corals are John strong. Like these guys have been thick. Only the healthiest have survived, so these guys are unkillable. And then to
Yeah.
a certain point, there's some truth to that. As they've gone through all these stressors, the ones that survive are going to be the strongest ones. So it makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah, for sure. And that's back to that thing with, maybe there's zooxanthellae in certain parts of Indonesia or say the Red Sea. Apparently, corals are really hardy in the Red Sea,
Really?
that can be transplanted into other reefs, that is more resilient to those temperature swings. Because often those
Yeah.
bleaching events are not the coral dying, it's the zooxanthellae ejecting
Yeah.
from the coral. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to see if they get anywhere with it. I mean, I think it was like a ocean scientist I saw a lecture do on this, and I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a little bit more of a band-aid than it is a real solution. Because
Yes.
if the
Yeah.
temperature keeps going up, you're just gonna have to get
You have to
better.
keep acclimating them to like
Yeah,
90 degrees. Like, I
yeah.
mean, what was it, like 100 in Florida? Like it's just like how do you acclimate? How do you yeah, we actually my partner and I literally same words out of your mouth that we were talking about. It's like, do you kind of feel like this is a band-aid? Like we're not solving the actual environmental
Hmm.
issue to solve these things. We're just kind of
Yeah.
reacting to the effects of it, so but
Yeah, I'll have to get the name of who the biologist was, but
yeah.
she was based out of the institute in Hawaii, and
Oh, yeah.
I think she was saying that there would be bleaching events where, like, Possilopora, which is one of the sort of, there's only really Porites and Possilopora in Hawaii that I've seen,
Yeah.
which are cool. But she was saying that they would see a bleaching event, and there would be like one or two in a region where like a few hundred or thousand or whatever bleach, one or two would look totally fine. So the idea was
Survive.
to go and see like what's different about these specific ones. And we're
Yeah.
by accident doing those tests all the time
I know.
by putting these corals through this shit we put them through.
That's exactly it. Still have my Oregon tort and all the crap that it's seen over the years. I'm like, that
Yeah,
guy will survive anything these days.
yeah, super cool. Yeah, I mean, I hope the scientific community at some point will, our little anecdotal experience that we gain as hobbyists and as business owners and what we do. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it does provide some probably some meaningful information to those people. Like, I mean, how many marine biologists spent the amount of time you and I have spent with our hands in the tank, literally working with
Right.
Acropora or Euphilia or
Right.
whatever. Like, we have such an eye for it, and we
Right.
don't have. Yeah, I mean, you have some of the background, right? But
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But
But
like, yeah.
like literally the exact situation where there's at the university here in Austin, there is a coral research facility here, and my friend and I, the one down the street, I think I initially reached out to them a long, long time ago, and I was looking for something to kind of like, single man, had a little extra time on my hands, no kids, and I
Mhm,
was like, would you be open to someone just volunteering in the lab? Because it
mhm,
was a core research lab, and they're like, oh, well, and it kind of schedule-wise, it didn't kind of work out at the time, but we kind of kept in touch. And then they had moved to a certain point where they were wanting like live specimens to experiment on, and they focused on Milleopora. So he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, do you have any like? Can I get some frags of Milleopora for you for some research?" I'm like, "Gladly." So I'm snipping away stuff and dropping it off. And then eventually it came to a point where they're like, "You know what? We'd love to have someone consult us on how to keep corals alive."
Yeah, let's start with keeping corals alive, and then we'll
Yeah.
think about breeding
So
them. Yeah,
they
yeah.
were on the experiment side of it, the science side of it. They knew everything about husbandry and what was needed to keep these things alive, but they just couldn't do it themselves because they
Mhm.
just didn't have that experience. And it's not that they couldn't be learned, but they were like, well, you guys, you two know what you're doing. So can we
Mhm.
pay you guys to set up tanks in our systems and keep the corals alive? And so at that point, I'm married and having kids, and he was more the single guy. And I was like, hey, take him and he will help you out. And so he got a system going on their rooftop, which is interesting. It's climate control, but it's on the rooftop, so it's
Mhm.
natural light coming into this
Mhm.
thing,
Cool.
and through different varying shades, I'll put it over to control the par level. And so that's been the experiment going, but they were able to spawn some Milleopora in that system
Cool.
and in his system as well, because he kind of set his home system up. And it was really interesting. He got a beautiful spawn I think the first year that he did it. And so it saved them money because instead of having to go to Australia and collect samples during the spawning event, they were able to spawn it here, right here in Austin. And
Mhm.
it saved them a trip, saved them all, and they were able to do their experiments off of that.
Cool.
So it's really interesting, like what you said about hobbyists and scientists, academia and hobbyists being able to kind of find this collaborative effort to help each other out on these things. So
Yeah, I mean,
to learn.
we might not be able to talk the science talk, but we know what we're looking at.
Exactly. We're like, what are you guys doing? And both him and I have a science background. We're like, what are you guys doing with
Yeah.
these? So it was just kind of funny. But
Was this facility able to? Were some of the spawn able to settle? Like, did they actually have successful
so
offspring?
not so much settlement side. They were interested in like studying the gametes and studying different parts of like I guess one to find the trigger on how to get it to spawn because they were kind of keying in on maybe like moonlights. Maybe it is just moonlights. Trying to single a factor out. But no, not so much as like any insight into that process other
Hmm.
than spawning
Yeah.
and using it locally. So
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I wonder. Like, I've had a couple of acropora spawns, and one time it was
yeah,
just Cali tort,
yeah,
and it was interesting because it was a bigger colony, and there was a
yeah.
frag cistern that was attached, and there was a bunch of frags, but one sort of mini colony, and the mini colony spawned at the same time as the big colony. So there
Oh, the
was
big main company. Yeah.
some correlation, no pun intended, between the two of them. But this more recent spawn I had was like I had like freaking like 15 different corals spawning or something like that.
Oh, really? And
So
are you like doing any variable seasonal temperatures? Are you trying to do any of that, or
no,
is
I
it
don't
just happen?
even run the moonlight cycles on my radions, so
Right.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think also like if we have corals that we've had in the hobby for a long time, all the ones that spawn were old school corals, right?
Okay. Yeah.
They weren't like so if they have a memory of like it's a seasonal memory of when to spawn
Yeah.
because don't all the corals spawn on the same day in Australia or something like that?
Yeah.
Like isn't that
Yeah.
pretty typical? They
Yeah.
totally forgot, when the day that was. But it's yeah,
So you get these premature spawners, like, hey, what's going on over here? It's not even the right season for it.
premature, premature.
I know, I know. Sorry, I turned into a 13-year-old boy there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Uh, there's a question I've been asking a few people because it's just a little thing
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I'm maybe semi struggling with right now. Um,
yeah,
a few of my corals that should have that metallic green in the base.
yeah.
So let's say like PC Rainbow, the
Uh-huh.
CB Maleficent, like they have great color, like they're very vibrantly red, but they don't have
Right,
that metallic kind of green gold kind of in the base like they used to. One
right.
person suggested that it could be to do with just like lower light, you get more of that pigment. And another thought I had was that it could be iron, but I just wonder if you've seen anything to do with that you can
No,
attribute to it.
at least with the PC, yeah, the PC Rainbow, I felt like the lower light, it definitely manifested more.
Yeah.
So, kind of like Red Planet, where you put it a little bit lower and you'll get more of those greens versus the intense red and pinks. At least for PC Rainbow, in my experience, lowering the par, and you'll get some more of that green pop on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, I haven't experimented with like iron or anything like that, and messing with those micro elements as much to kind of see some of these changes.
Because something I would say that I've seen systems where the whole tank just seemed to have really, really good metallic in its corals. Like it just seemed to, for whatever reason, like it was the coral that was high up and low down and whatever. Like the corals just wanted to be metallic.
Just had that. Is it maybe lighting?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say.
T5, or a little bit of metal
Yeah,
halide.
the last system I saw it in was a tank that was just lit by those Red Sea LEDs. And he had great, like his corals were very, very metallic. So, yeah, I don't know. I've experimentally been paying more attention to iron and seeing if that has anything to do with it. I'm waiting on an ICP that should arrive tomorrow morning, I think. So
always that waiting game.
We'll see.
Yeah. But yeah, I wonder that because for a while I kept thinking in my head, I'm like UV. What about true UV light? Is that causing some of them to fluoresce in certain ways that we don't see? And like a lot of our lightings is they mention UV, but it's not true UV. It's not under a certain nanometer to be true UV. So I'm like, I wonder if certain lights can bring those certain colors out. Like with the metal halides, we had UV in there. It was true UV. They had spectrums that dipped below 400. And maybe forgive my memory, but I feel like the radions don't have true
Yeah,
UV.
I mean, that's definitely been
Kind of like a purple
discussion
UV.
topic. Is it? Yeah, it's not like a true hitting that waveform. Yeah,
Right.
I'd like to see some studies on it. I know, like Tulio was talking about it, and it would be interesting. I mean, I don't know. I kind of think, like you say, it could be lighting related, and it could be it could be the channel that says UV on the radions. That's whatever that nanometer frequency is. It could be affecting. It could be taking them away, and essentially, as opposed to helping develop them. But it's just because the PC Rainbow is a pretty easy acro. Like I grow it like crazy, but it just doesn't have that super metallic base anymore. So okay. Well, my quest will go on.
Oh no, I was just saying, like the last time I remember seeing that metallic, I don't have PC Rainbow anymore, but like the last time I remember seeing that color was when I had it under my ATI Sun Power fixture. Like T5 just raining down on it. And that's when I remember I saw the last color pop on it in that metallic sheen that you're talking about. Because since then I switched over the radions. And I will say, like, at least and this is anecdotal because it's just my opinion, but like for me, I felt like the radions were great at pulling these nuances of like micro rainbowish colors and like tenuous, and pulling out certain other colors that are very vibrant to me. But I felt like as an overall color, I thought like my T5s felt like they just had that metallic kind of luster to it a little bit more to me. And so that's why I've been trying to still run both. I've been trying to run T5 and radions, but I wonder if maybe one of my systems I just slap T5 back over it again and kind of do a little comparison again and kind of see if there's a missing link somewhere. But
because I'm running T5s. Maybe we can. I won't take up too much of your time, but we can talk about lighting a little bit here as a final thing. I'm running T5s, but it's the Aquatic Life hybrid, so 4 bulbs. And I only run them for 2 to 3 hours a day on my systems. I've experimented kind of bringing it up and down. And then I have radions and some reef bright and Orphic bars and stuff like that. But
Okay.
it's a sort of real hybrid combo. But
Yeah.
what are you running for, say, your midday kind of peak, and how many hours would you say that is for
So I
SPS?
run the same. Yeah, I run the same aquatic life hybrid fixtures with the radions in the middle and the four T5 bulbs. And the
Yeah.
T5, actually, I run them for 8 hours with blue plus bulbs in them, and the radions. I think I run with like the AB plus. So I
Mhm.
would say more blue. I would say overall the T5s actually kind of whiten them up more than anything, but
Mhm. Yeah.
definitely more of a bluer spectrum as it goes. And again, a lot of that is just for more the commercial side of things, being able
Mhm.
to pull these certain colors out. That is, definitely what people are clamoring after when they're looking for a frag purchase. I just, personally, if it was my own system and I was just running from my display, like my display, I run much more white.
Mhm.
Slam it with a little bit more of a wider spectrum because I like my Oregon Tort to look blue and not
Yeah. Yeah.
and not faded blue under blue light. Like it needs that wider spectrum to look good. And
Yeah.
I also do it for my fish, like my angels, just to have them have that color pop. They just look much better under wider light.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, so two different answers there. For my frag systems, it's going to be the bluer spectrums. For my display, it'll be more
Yeah.
that whiter
And you
look
said
to it.
8 hours of T5, and the
Yeah,
radion's probably kind of ramping up and staying at its peak for what, like 4 or 5 hours, or what would you
yeah,
say is?
about 4 or 5 hours of
Yeah.
peak, and then the dawn dusk on both sides, going
Yeah.
to all blues on either side. So
Yeah.
I think nothing crazy. I think a lot of people run similar stuff, but
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it sounds like we're doing a pretty similar method, but maybe I'll run my T5s a couple more hours and experiment back up again. It's nice. It's like I feel like the aquatic life hybrid's been like training wheels for transitioning into LED. It's like, well, you
yeah.
still have your dad's still there pushing you along if you need
Yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah. We're just hanging with the T5s on either side just so we don't tip over. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, absolutely it. And
yeah,
I mean, I'll be honest, like there are better T5 fixtures out there. They better reflectors, better everything, and but they do the job. They give me enough T5 that I'm happy that I don't
yeah,
take my training wheels entirely off.
yeah,
They
yeah.
just keep cruising with it.
Sure.
But
All right. Well, I've been always ending these podcasts with a rapid fire questions section.
oh
So
my,
let's see
let me
how.
get a drink
Yeah.
so I can get ready for this.
Okay. Like,
Okay, Adam.
I mean, and also you can answer like very like non-traditionally. Like you don't have to say like a specific coral, or you can say a species, whatever. Just do what you can. So,
Okay.
okay.
I'm a little
So
wordy sometimes, so I'll try
yeah.
to keep it nice and tight. Okay.
Okay. So favorite fish.
Favorite fish, my banded angelfish.
Nice. Favorite SPS. It's hard.
Man, that is hard. I love this one piece that I have. It's a shortcake variety, but
Mm.
it's literally piercing red, blinding red, just tips on it. It just the whole colony is just like a neon
Wow.
shortcake. Like if you just took a normal shortcake, put it in Photoshop, and ramped the saturation all the way up, that's that piece. And
That
so
sounds sweet. Nice.
I love this thing. I've been babying it. It's somewhat sensitive sometimes, but I finally got a decent amount of it back, and I finally cut my first frag in like years of it. But I call it the lotus blossom, and so that
Nice.
is by far and away my favorite piece.
Okay,
So.
sweet. People need to look out for that one when there's more of it. Okay, favorite LPS.
Favorite LPS? LPS weren't always my thing,
You can
but
say a
man.
species. You can say, it's very, very open here, but
So
rapid.
the Malaysian sun god.
Oh, okay.
It is the brightest torch I've ever
Oh,
seen. It
cool.
is so bright.
Sweet. That sounds nice. Favorite softy.
It's softy. Man. Right now the Godzilla mushroom. It's just ridiculous. It's beautiful.
Oh yeah. Okay, I gotta check that out. I don't think I know it.
It's gorgeous.
Favorite light? It can be source or a particular model.
Ah, man, I still love my ATI Sun Power.
Yeah, great,
Yeah,
great light. Grow any
yeah, it's
kind of
beautiful.
coral under that.
The
Okay,
blind too.
favorite product line if you could choose just one product line to use for all of your, chemistry and salt and everything.
Oh man, I'm a sucker for Hannah. I trust them.
But they don't make salt. I'm talking like product
Oh,
line
I'm sorry.
for that,
But you meant like fire.
gives you everything to run a system, like all the chemistry
Oh,
part of it.
yeah, I Red Seas probably. I lean towards their salt and some of their additives too. So
They have a good broad range of stuff for sure. So the next question was salt. So I'm going to say you're saying Red Sea for salt, and that's probably
yeah,
based
blue
on value too. Yeah. Okay. Favorite aquarium controller if you've had experience with more than one, I'm going to say.
Well, it'd just be Apex.
Yeah.
What was that one? I forget that one that came out and I bought in on it and it just completely never even came to fruition.
One of the Tronics or something, or it was one that never happened.
They actually produced it and it was a bust because it wasn't working correctly. And then it just, the company vaporized. And I wish I remember the name. Hopefully I blocked it out of my memory because
Yeah.
I've had.
Yeah. Well, screw that one.
Screw that one indeed.
Yeah. So next one is favorite wave pump.
Favorite wave pump. Jeez. I love the gyres. I just hate maintaining them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's your answer? Gyres?
yeah.
Yeah, they're awesome. Okay, most hated pest. Most despised.
Most despised would definitely be like black bugs, like the gray, white, and black bugs on Acropora.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we
They
talked
are
about
just
this before.
Yeah, they're just the current worst pest right now for acros.
It's a pain in the butt. Yeah.
And they're everywhere, like everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, here's a quick one. Let's try to. We could talk about this all day, but if you were to have, say, we're gonna say lighting, flow, and water chemistry. If two of those things could be like pretty averagely good, and then one was just like totally knocked out of the park, which one would you choose?
So what is it? Water chemistry,
Flow,
flow,
lighting, water
and
chemistry. Which one would you say you would emphasize more attention to?
I think water chemistry for sure.
I think most would agree. Okay, and the final question. This is kind of a fun thought exercise. So if you had the financial means to do so, would you do Apollo Reef?
Hey, what?
Apollo Reef.
Apollo Reef?
You know, and Andrew Sandler's big, massive 14,000 gallon reef.
Oh, sorry. I totally missed that. I'm sorry. When you said that, I was like, hey, what? Oh, man. So money's not an issue, huh?
No, yeah, you have the financial means, 100%.
Man. I mean, who would say no to that? Like, who wouldn't want this beautiful 360 round coral fish, like all the rarest fish, all the beautiful corals, and then someone maintains it all for you. You don't even have to
hire the best people, you pay them well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you don't even have to do your own PR, like they're like shooting videos for you. Like, who wouldn't pass that up? Yeah, yeah.
That's funny
Easy.
because you were actually the first person to say yes. The other people were just too concerned with the maintenance side of it or trying to trust somebody to do it.
Yeah, someone else is doing it,
Yeah.
I guess I got to that point where like there's a hobbyist side of me and there's a vendor side of me. And like, man, like the vendor's starting to win out a little bit as far as like keeping up with the maintenance of things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh yeah, someone else will do it? Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
I just want to grow corals,
Totally.
Sell them.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Dude, well, this has been really fun. Let's definitely
Likewise.
do it again, and we'll hit a hard subject sometime. We can like get deep into something.
All right,
But
bring it on. I'll work on adding extra sleep over the periods before we do that.
Yeah, sounds
My
good.
brain is there.
No, that was great. Cool. Okay, thanks, man. Well, let's talk soon, and thanks for coming on the pod.
All right, thanks for having me, Adam. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Yeah, take care. Cheers.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Reef with Farmer Ty. If you want to check out his corals, you can go to blacklabelaquatics.com and you'll see a really awesome selection of corals available there, shipped within the United States only, of course. I will link to the resources and products discussed in this podcast in the show notes. And if you have any suggestions for future guests, want to just ask us a question, make a suggestion, make a criticism, whatever you want to say, feel free to reach out at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please check us out at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.